coming, and I know that it's really heartening to see so many people here because it's a very difficult issue. And in the past, when we've had conferences, I've seen the turnout to be very low. And though there are still more women than there are men in the room, it's still really heartening to see that men are also taking this issue seriously. It's no longer just a woman's issue, and men need to also be here to, just be part of us in this process of change. We did try to have a gender balance in our panelists, but unfortunately the male member dropped out, so we, as usual, always have more women on this issue, but nonetheless, I'm sure Prabhat and Rajesh will hold fort in the presence of the other three very strong women. So what I'm going to do is just give you a prelude, a little bit of information about women in the workplace, some basic facts about the new Act, and I hope that this creates a backdrop for what the panelists are going to do, and that is sharing their insights, perspectives and experiences on the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. Women are entering the workforce in larger numbers. There's a steady rise in the number of women in both the formal as well as the informal sectors of the Indian economy, as elsewhere in Asia as well. However, most women tend to remain at the junior levels, though we have some who do manage to reach senior positions. So in spite of this increase in the number of women, we still find that 25% of the total workforce of women is in rural areas, and when we come to the urban areas, we find quite a steep drop to only 16% of the workforce of women in the urban areas. So we have this here, very few women. Women are also inadequately represented in the top management, and this is despite provisions that we have in the New Companies Act, which says that there should be at least one woman in a board, and so far less than half of the companies have complied on this aspect of the law. So we find that there are an increasing number of women entering into education, health, hospitality, the BPO industry, IT, banking and other related sectors, both in the public and the private sphere. And women's participation in the formal sectors of Indian economy is going to increase in the coming decade, and this is going to be spurred by the service sector. And it is with this background that we need to understand the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. These are some statistics which show the percentage of sexual harassment. But I just want to point out that sexual harassment, these are reported cases, and this is only the tip of the iceberg. We still don't have an exact number of cases which are not reported. And also to point out that sexual harassment in the workplace is not only confined to offices in metros and big cities, but also smaller towns and B-grade cities. Now the low number of reported cases could be attributed to lack of awareness on the issue, knowledge of the Act, and what it holds for women. And I think finally the fact that for most companies, this is not a priority area. So it's not taken seriously in the workplace at all. The landmark judgment of Bhavli Devi led to the Vishakha Guidelines, which was a milestone in recognizing and accepting that sexual harassment existed in the workplace. And for the first time ever through the Vishakha Guidelines, sexual harassment was recognized as an offense. And these guidelines gave India the first ever recourse to legal action in cases of sexual harassment that occurred in the workplace. However, as with the Vishakha, a lot of us know that compliance to the Vishakha was very low, mostly because people did not perceive of it as being a law. Even though it was mandatory, it was not a law, so there was very low compliance. And today we have the Vishakha replaced by the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. I'm just going to give you some key features of the Act and just describe some of them in a little detail. For one, the Act gives a very comprehensive definition of sexual harassment, and as you can see, it includes all of these. More importantly, it also classifies sexual harassment into four main types. So you have verbal, non-verbal, physical and visual. And the Act also covers IT-related dimensions. In this, we are talking about emails, you're talking about SMS, you're talking about voicemail. They all come under sexual harassment. Key to remember in this is how do you define what sexual harassment is. So the key words to remember here are unwelcome or unsolicited, and the behavior has to have sexual connotations to it. So that's critical in when you're trying to understand what is sexual harassment. Now, if you're talking about sexual harassment and you're talking about the workplace, so obviously you must talk and define what the workplace consists of. And this has been done very well in the Act. It defines all places. In fact, I've got a whole list. If you read the Act, you'll find it includes government organizations, departments, unit, private sector organizations, ventures, private ventures, their societies, trusts, NGOs. Hospitals and nursing homes are also covered here, as with sport institutes. So you have sports institutes, stadiums, and even residential and training areas of these. And this is critical because now you're expanding the definition of the workplace to going beyond the office confines. In fact, the focus of determining a workplace in the context of sexual harassment will rest with the working relationship between the parties, which is the aggrieved woman or the complainant and the respondent. So in this context, you also have homes which could be workplaces and where an act of sexual harassment can take place, though it may not be the formally defined workplace. And the Act also now includes public spaces such as markets, you have hotels, cafes, and other areas of employment as well. Now, unlike the Vishakha, the Act now includes the informal, the domestic worker, and the agricultural worker within its purview. And because we're including this, now instead of just the Internal Complaints Committee, which was meant for the formal workplace, we also have the Local Complaints Committee. Now, the presiding officer or the chairperson of either of these two committees is to be a senior woman in the workplace, someone with authority, someone who can handle cases. There's a sensitivity, but most important is that someone who has authority and clout to be able to handle a complaint even against the senior most person in the organization. There is provision for the unbiased third party on both committees, and as many of you know, NGOs are one of the categories where people are selected to be on the committee. The ICC has a minimum of 4 members, of which 50% are to be women. And the Local Complaints Committee has representation from the district, which includes women from scheduled caste, tribes, other backward classes. And as an ex officio member, it's the concerned officer for social welfare, as well as women and child development. So both committees have roughly 4 to 5 members on it. Now, internal complaints committees are to be constituted where there are more than 10 employees, and the membership of these committees is drawn from amongst the staff itself, with representation of both men and women, and also drawn from different levels of the organizational hierarchy. And this is done so that anyone may feel comfortable in approaching committee members, because if you have only senior people, then perhaps junior employees may not be so comfortable in approaching them with cases of sexual harassment. The Local Complaints Committee is for those organizations which do not have 10 employees, so they don't have a committee in place. It is also, the LCC is also for women who are domestic workers, other informal workers, as we said, agricultural workers. And it is also meant for organizations where the complaint may be against the employer himself. So that's the importance of the committee. The law has very clearly defined the roles and responsibilities of both these committees. First and foremost is to address complaints of sexual harassment in a time-bound manner. Like I said, the committee should be accessible to all, must follow principles of natural justice, be transparent and accountable to all the employees of the organization as well as the management. Committees in their role are required to prepare and submit an annual report of the number of cases of sexual harassment, whether they were addressed or not, how many are pending, and this report is submitted to the employer and as well as to the district officer. Now, both of these are bodies mandated by the law, and they are expected to play both a preventive role as well as a redressal mechanism for the complaints of sexual harassment at the workplace. They are intended to deal with cases displaying gender sensitivity in their proceedings and creating an environment whereby women especially feel safe and secure in coming forward with their complaints. Now what's also most interesting, and in fact is quite an important point, it is that the committee will have the same powers as those vested in a civil court, which implies summoning and enforcing the attendance of any person and examining him or her on oath, and the discovery and production of documents and other prescribed matters. So you can see that actually it is committees play a very important role in the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace. Now the Act also defines a grievance redressal mechanism, and it's quite explicit as to who can file the complaint. The Vishakha was not so clear, but here, even if the woman herself is not able to file the complaint, it can be done by a friend, a relative, a colleague. The procedure is very clearly laid down. There is a provision for conciliation in case the complainant wants the same, whether she wants before the inquiry, there's a process of conciliation, and if that takes place and it's satisfactory, the inquiry doesn't have to be conducted. It's clear in notice to the respondent how soon it should be given, when a reply should come in, the presence of committee members during inquiry, and this is important because we have committees which are set up, but we also know of cases where the committee members are not present at the inquiry, especially the chairperson and the third party. So that's very clearly laid out in the Act. There is also provision in the mechanism for the transfer of either the woman or the respondent during the inquiry procedure. And I think the most important here is the completion of the inquiry within 90 days of the complaint being registered. Unlike the Vishakha, there is a provision for false and malicious complaints. However, I mean, this is something everyone has a question about. Is there something for false and malicious complaints? And I don't want to say it, but the presumption is for many people that women are going to make these false and malicious complaints. More often than not, it will be a false complaint. But the law is very specific in stating that the mere inability to substantiate the complaint does not result in it being a false complaint. And I think this is the part that we really have to focus upon. And malicious intent is to be established only after an inquiry of the same, and that too the procedures are laid down. So this was a very important clause, and I did want to focus on that. And here in the Act we have severe and stringent penalties for defaulting employers. It's a fine of up to 50,000 rupees for the first offence, and mostly this is in not setting up a committee or not complying with the law. A repeated offence will be twice the punishment of the first conviction, and if there is continued defaulting, then a cancellation of the license or the withdrawal or non-renewal of registration for conducting a business activity. So if we actually look at the Act, we're also talking not so much about redressal. Redressal will always happen. But I think the intention is to see that you prevent the occurrence of sexual harassment. And that can be seen in a few steps that the companies can follow. You have capacity building of all staff. There's a review of norms and policies from a gender lens. So review existing norms and policies, see that they suit the needs of both men and women in the workplace. Like we said, women are coming into the workplace, which is something which is new. They're entering male-dominated areas. Rules and policies were always made for men because men were always the main workforce. If you have women coming in, you need to change those. Many organizations don't have a gender policy, so one needs to think of that, and at the same time also look at an anti-sexual harassment policy, which is also something that the Act points towards. And orientation of all staff on the provision of this Act, because if people are aware of what constitutes sexual harassment, what is the workplace, what is the grievance redressal mechanism, it might help in creating a more conducive workplace. And finally, I do want to say that sexual harassment cannot be seen in isolation of the larger framework of gender discrimination. And commitment from the top management is critical, not only for the prevention, but also the redressal of sexual harassment. So if you want to see how the top management is committed, it's not merely in following the law in the letter. It's more in complying with the law in the spirit of the law. And that tends not to happen. We also find that in some workplaces there's tokenism in constituting committees which are non-functional, but it is worse when they are dysfunctional. Non-functional is still better. Dysfunctional creates more problems, and it becomes counterproductive to the safety and security of women. It also becomes counterproductive to creating an environment where women can come forth and speak about issues they are facing. It's not always complaints, but it is about workplaces which can prohibit women in several ways. Just to be able to speak about that, you need an environment that is conducive. So if you have committees whose role is to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, and if they are not trained to recognize or deal with what constitutes sexual harassment or what the act comprises of, they actually tend to see sexual harassment as isolated cases of misbehavior, and they don't see it as systemic discrimination against women. And that becomes a problem, because then they do not see the larger picture and they seem to deal piecemeal with all of that. And it is only when you have committees that are sensitive, that you see beyond just mere sexual harassment, to see gender discrimination, can you actually hope to have conducive and sensitive workplaces. Now, since all of you are here and you're a captive audience, we did want to say that we had really worked on this issue a lot. And one of the roles that we do is prevention of sexual harassment in our training and capacity building. We have developed a 3-hour-long online training capsule, so it's 3 modules of an hour each. And I did want to give you all a glimpse of that, so that you're aware this is meant for all employees as well as employers. And I just met a young man out and I said, you should do our training. And he said, I think, ma'am, that's for women. And I did want to say, I did say to him, no, that's not for women. So I want to run you through this. And we do have flyers on this. So I would request you on your way out to also pick them up. So this is actually the way the course runs. So it's like a screen shot of the course. Can we have the audio?
A female colleague makes sexual advances towards another female colleague despite her disinterest in a relationship.
The SHW Act, Section 2F, defines an employee as a person employed at a workplace for any work on regular, temporary, ad hoc, or daily wage basis, either directly or through an agent, including a contractor, with or without the knowledge of the principal employer. Employee includes a co-worker, a contract worker, probationer, trainee, apprentice, or others who may be called by any other such name.
The SHW Act presents 2 ways to respond to a sexual harassment complaint: conciliation and inquiry.
The SHW Act prescribes in Section 4.2 that the ICC must have at least 4 members, out of which at least 1/2 must be women.
The committee must caution the aggrieved, respondent, and all witnesses to maintain confidentiality regarding the case and its proceedings.
So this was just a small glimpse. Obviously the whole course is longer, but we just wanted to show you the modalities that we use. It's a multimedia presentation. It's available in both Hindi and English, so it reaches out to all employees across the organization. And like I said, please collect your flyers when you go out. Thank you.